The next rule continues the above theme and gives some instructions in terse phrases and symbols on the science of invocation and evocation and its significant ritual or program. This program is, in reality, an expression or a human formulation of the science of sound, just in so far as yet as sound affects humanity and human affairs. Forget not my earlier teaching upon the word. Remember also that the sound is the sound or note of life itself, embodying its dynamic impulse, its creative power, and its responsive sensitivity to all contacts. Rule 3. Duel the moving forward, the door is left behind. That is a happening of the past. Let the cry of invocation issue forth from the deep center of the group's clear, cold light. Let it evoke response from the bright center lying far ahead. When the demand and the response are lost in one great sound, move outward from the desert, leave the seas behind, and know that God is fire. This is perhaps one of the two most occult rules which the initiate has to master, whether as an individual or in conjunction with his group. The group recognizes and works under the pervasive influence of the purpose. The individual initiate works with the plan. The group expression, as far as in it lies at any given moment in time and space, is in line with the will of the one in whom we live and move and have our being, the life of all that is. The individual initiate uses the attractive force, to which we give the oft misleading name of love, of that fundamental life to gather together that which will give body to form and so manifest the will. The group can be, and frequently is, responsive to the bright center, Shambhala, where the initiate by himself and in his own essential identity cannot so respond. The individual must be protected by the group from the terrific potencies which emanate from Shambhala. These must be stepped down for him by the process of distribution, so that their impact is not focused in any one or all of his centers, but is shared by all the group members. Here is the clue to the significance of group work. One of its major functions, esoterically speaking, is to absorb, share, circulate, and then distribute energy. This process of protection and of distribution is one of the functions of the great meeting of all the hierarchy under the aegis of the three great lords, the Manu, the Mahachohan, and the Christ, in that high and sacred valley in the Himalayas, where annually, after due preparation, the hierarchy makes contact with Shambhala, and the relationship is then set up between the bright and living center and the radiating and magnetic center, in order that the acquiescent waiting center may be stimulated to moving forward upon the ladder of evolution. Even the hierarchy itself needs the protection of its full membership in order rightly to absorb the incoming energies and later wisely to distribute the forces of the divine will in the three worlds where lies their major responsibility. The focused will of God in its immediate implications and application constitutes the point of tension from which Shambhala works in order to bring about the eventual fruition of the divine purpose. This is a definite distinction between purpose and will. It is subtle indeed, but quite definite to the advanced initiate. And therefore, the dualistic nature of our planetary manifestation and our solar expression appear even in this. The members of the council at Shambhala recognize this distinction and therefore divide themselves into two groups, which are called in the ancient parlance registrants of the purpose and custodians of the will. Will is active, purpose is passive, waiting for the results of the activity of the will. These two groups are reflected in hierarchical circles by the Nirmanakayas, or the planetary contemplatives, and the custodians of the plan. The function of the registrants of the purpose is to keep the channel open between our Earth, the planet Venus, and the central spiritual sun. The function of the custodians of the will is to relate the council, the hierarchy, and humanity, thus creating a basic triangle of force between the major centers of the planetary life. This is the higher expression, symbolic if you like, of the six-pointed star, formed of two interlaced triangles. A replica of this fundamental triangle and of this symbol of energy with its inflow and distribution is to be found in the relation of the three higher centers in the human being, head, heart, and throat, to the three lower centers, solar plexus, sacral center, and the center at the base of the spine. The science of invocation and evocation is also seen to be symbolically proceeding along evolutionary lines. Worship, the attitude of the mystic, must give place to invocation in the man who knows he is divine. This symbolic revelation is to be seen in the lifting up of the three lower energies and their evocative response to the three higher, thus producing an eventual unity at the point of tension. I realize that this is a hard thing to comprehend because it embodies truths which are difficult for the disciple to grasp, but they will be grasped and mastered by each one as he proceeds along the path of discipleship and submits to the needed training for initiation. They will also be mastered later in this century and in the next by the rapidly developing humanity, thus demonstrating that the initiation of the moment becomes the past achievement of the masses eventually. This enhanced liberation will later appear as a definite result of the war. The Atlantic Charter and the Four Freedoms, formulated in the tension produced by the world agony and strain, are the reflections in this, and embody all that is possible for average materially minded man to grasp of the present will of Shambhala as it conditions the plans of the hierarchy and is impulsed by the registrants of the purpose. This is as far as the two groups of custodians have been able to convey this revelation to the best human intellects, the first group dealing with the senior members of the hierarchy, and the latter with those initiates and disciples who are closely related to humanity. Here again, we come up against the fact that the science of invocation and evocation, with which this rule fundamentally deals, is primarily a great and scientific activity of which modern humanity knows practically nothing, but which is related to thought power and to thought form building. Only initiates of the highest degree, such as the great lords, have the right to invoke alone and unaccompanied by any protective agency, such as a group, and the reason for that is they are themselves members of the council at Shambhala and are individually registrants of the purpose. The annual appearance of the Lord Buddha is the outer demonstration or symbol of the emergence of this science of invocation and evocation in the waking consciousness of humanity. Prayer is the dim, faint, and inadequate expression of this. Affirmation of divinity in order to gain material well being is a distortion of this truth. This needs to be remembered. The true significance of this emerging science is that in the early or first stages, it embodies the seed concept of the New World religion. In the great invocations which I have given out, the first one, the externalization of the hierarchy, page 5, let the forces of light bring illumination to mankind, was an effort on my part to put into words the invocative cry of mankind and of all men and women of goodwill throughout the world. Its success was indicative of the strength of that goodwill. The second, the externalization of the hierarchy, page 5, let the Lords of Liberation issue forth, can in reality only be used with any measure of hope of success by aspirants, disciples, and initiates, and hence was not nearly so popular with the general public, though in reality much more powerful and potentially effective. It was essential, however, that a fusion of the two groups should take place before the invocative cry of humanity as a whole could be powerful and effective in evoking response. Prior to taking up the study, phrase by phrase, of Rule 3, I would call your attention to the relation between this rule and the earlier one given to applicants. The applicant sends out his cry across the desert, over all the seas, and through the fires. His entire personality, integrated and oriented, is focused at a point of tension. Then he utters his cry, symbolic of a voiceless expression, and this cry beats against the door which separates him from the soul in the first instance and from the hierarchy in the second. The door is only a symbol of separation. It divides one place from another location, one sphere of activity from another, and one state of consciousness from another. It fosters in the aspirant a sense of duality. It is a word descriptive of the mystic attitude. This attitude embraces the concepts of here and there, of soul and body, of God and man, of hierarchy and humanity. But Rule 3, as voiced for initiates, demonstrates that this mystical realization finally goes, the sense of separation disappears, and the door is left behind. One dual, the moving forward, the door is left behind. That is a happening of the past. The first point which should be noted is that we have here the definition of an initiate. He is one who, in his twofold nature, soul and personality, moves forward. No longer is his point of tension that of the personality. He has fused and blended two divine aspects in himself, and they now constitute one integrated unit. This fusion produces its own point of tension. He has moved forward through the door. A point of tension again ensues, in which a word goes forth in response to the invocative cry of the new initiate. A word is returned to him, accepted as a group. Then he, with the group of which he is now recognized part, moves forward. For the initiate, as I have earlier pointed out, the past is left behind. Let there be no recollection. The present embodies a point of tension. The future indicates a moving forward from that point of tension as a result of its effective action. The door closes behind the initiate, who is now an accepted member of his group, and as the old commentary puts it, its sound, in closing, informs the watching world that the initiate has passed into a secret place, and that to reach him in the real sense, they too must pass that door. This conveys the thought of individual self-initiation to which all must be subjected, and indicates also the loneliness of the initiate as he moves forward. He does not yet understand all that his group as a whole grasps. He is himself not understood by those on the other side of the door. He has sensed for some time the group with which he is now affiliated and is becoming increasingly aware of their spiritual impersonality, which seems to him to be almost a form of aloofness and which in no way feeds in him those elements which are of a personality nature. He therefore suffers. Those left behind as part of his old life in no way comprehend his basic impersonality, basic even if undeveloped impersonality. This attitude of theirs evokes in him, when sensed, a resentment and a criticism which he realizes is not right, but which at this stage he seems unable to avoid, whilst those he criticizes endeavor to tear him down, or at least to make him feel despised and uncomfortable. In the early stages, he takes refuge from those left behind by withdrawing himself and by much unnecessary and almost obtrusive silence. He learns to penetrate into the consciousness of his new group by strenuously endeavoring to develop their capacity for spiritual impersonality. He knows it is something which he must achieve. As he achieves it, he discovers that this impersonality is not based on indifference or upon preoccupation as he had thought, but upon a deep understanding, upon a dynamic focus on world service, upon a sense of proportion, and upon a detachment which makes true help possible. Thus, the door, the past, are left behind. Thus, the door and the past are left behind. St. Paul attempted to express this idea when he said, "Forgetting the things which are behind, press forward towards the prize of your high calling in Christ." I would ask your attention to the word calling. 2. Let the cry of invocation issue forth from the deep center of the group's clear, cold light. We are not here dealing with the light in the head or with soul light as it is perceived by the attuned and aligned personality. That too is left behind, and the initiate is aware of the light of the ashram and the all-including light of the hierarchy. These are two aspects of soul light which the individual light in the head has revealed. That soul light which the initiate has been aware of from the first moment of soul contact and at rapidly decreasing intervals is created by the fusion of the light of the soul with which the light of substance itself, and is the inevitable and automatic consequence of the purification of the three vehicles and of creative meditation. We are told in the world scriptures that in that light we shall see light, and it is to this other light that I now refer, a light which is only to be perceived when the door is shut behind the initiate. That light is itself composed of the light of Buddhi and the light of Atma, and these are, to interpret these Sanskrit terms esoterically, the light of pure reason, which is the sublimation of the intellect, and the light of the spiritual will, which is the revelation of the whole of the unfolding purpose. The first is focused in the ashram, and the second in the hierarchy as a whole, and both of them are the expression of the activity of the spiritual triad. Let me make myself clearly understood if possible. You have therefore three great lights, all of them focused upon the mental plane. Far beyond that plane, the symbolism of light is not used. You have therefore three great lights, all of them focused upon the mental plane. For beyond that plane, the symbolism of light is not used. Divinity is known as life, where the monad and its expression, the spiritual triad, are concerned. All the lights are finally focused upon the mental plane. 1, the blended light of the soul and personality; 2, the light of the egoic group, which, when forming a recognized group in the consciousness of the illumined initiate, is called an ashram, embodying the light of Buddhi or pure reason; and 3, the light of the hierarchy as a center of radiance in the planetary body and embodying the light which understanding of the plan and cooperation with that plan produce, and which comes from identification upon mental levels with the spiritual will. All these three aspects of light can be described as: 1, the light which is thrown upward, which is the lesser light from the angle of the monad; 2, the light which the spiritual triad reflects upon the mental plane; and 3, the focused light which is produced by the meeting of the two lights, the higher and the lower. These are the higher correspondence of the blazing forth of the light in the head, which the light of the personality and the light of the soul make contact. These are the higher correspondence of the blazing forth of the light in the head when the light of the personality and the light of the soul make contact. Beyond the mental plane, the initiatory impulse or emphasis is upon the life aspect, upon dynamic energy, and upon the cause of manifestation. And this incentive to progress is not based on revelation, which is ever incident to related to the significance of light. Light and revelation are cause and effect. The coming revelation, for which all men wait, and which will come when world adjustment has reached an already determined point, is concerned with the impartation to the human consciousness of the meaning and the purpose of life. This will take place in a gradually unfolding series of spiritual events. I cannot and must not put these truths more clearly, even if the necessary words were available to express what is not as yet even dimly sensed by disciples of the first and second degrees of initiation. What will come through that series of spiritual happenings and their inevitable reaction upon the whole body of humanity is in no way related to consciousness, to revelation, or to light. There will come to humanity at some moment, still a long way ahead, a period of realization constituting both a point of crisis and a point of tension. That realization will summarize in effective conditioning consciousness all that the quality of sensitivity has conveyed to mankind throughout the ages. It is the consummation of the activity of the Christ consciousness, and is the state referred to when it is said of the Christ, he shall see of the travail of his soul and be satisfied. And the crisis of that revelation, at its highest point of tension, humanity, as with one voice, will say, behold, all things are become new. This is the apotheosis of vision and the prelude to an unfoldment in the general mass human consciousness, from that point in time slowly brought about, of certain powers and capacities of which the race is today totally unaware. The immediate revelation ahead will be only the first step towards this distant related point, and its significance will not be apparent to the present generation or even to the next. It will, however, be steadily, though gradually, appreciated as the New World religion, with its emphasis upon the invocation of energies and the evocation of life more abundantly, is developed and has its inevitable effect. Students would do well to bear in mind that the impact of energies upon forms produces results which are dependent upon the quality of the forms receiving the impression. This is a statement of occult law. One of the purposes lying behind the present Holocaust of World War II has been the necessity for the destruction of inadequate forms. This destruction could have been brought about by an act of God, such as a great natural catastrophe or a universal epidemic, and such had been the original intention. Humanity was, however, swept by forces that carried in themselves the seeds of destruction, and there was that in humanity which responded to those forces. Therefore, therefore, the law of destruction was permitted to work through humanity itself, and men are now destroying the forms through which many masses of men are functioning. This is both a good and a bad thing viewed from the evolutionary angle. It is nevertheless a fact which cannot be gainsaid, and the problem, therefore, confronting the custodians of the will, working through the custodians of the plan, is to bring good out of the evil which man has wrought and thus gear events to the larger issues. That is one of the objectives before the hierarchy at this time, written in April 1943, as it prepares for participation in the May and June full moons. Can the forces be so organized and the energy so distributed that the full measure of good may be evoked from humanity by the invocation sounded forth by Shambhala? Can this evocation of a new cycle of spiritual contact and of liberation be brought about by the invocation of the men and women of goodwill? Can the will to good of the spiritual forces and the goodwill of humanity be brought together and produce those conditions in which the New World Order may function? These are the important questions which the hierarchy is attempting to solve. It must be remembered that the science of invocation and evocation is a reciprocal effort. Humanity could not be invocative were it not that the spiritual hierarchy, and by that term I include both Shambhala and the planetary hierarchy, is evoking the spirit of man. The invocative cry of humanity is evoked by the invocation or sound of the spiritual hierarchies. Man's responsibility, however, is to invoke at this time the Lords of Liberation and the Spirit of Peace. These are the beings which have the power to raise humanity once the race of men has assumed the right attitude. They correspond to the group in the third degree of Masonry who raised the Master. The response to the cry of mankind is largely but wholly dependent upon the quality of that cry. I wonder if I could make the problem of invocation clearer to you if I were to suggest that the words issue forth from the deep center of the group's clear cold light have a meaning both for the individual initiate and for all groups of disciples and all ashrams. The use of the words clear cold light is deeply symbolical. The clarity of that light indicates the function of the soul, as its great light enables the initiate to see light. The coldness of that light refers to the light of substance, which cannot be warmed into a glow by desire or by the heat of passion, but is now and at last only responsive to the light of the soul. It is therefore cold to all that limits and hinders, and this state of personality consciousness has to be realized at the very center of man's being. There, the clear light of the soul and the cold light of the personality are united in the deep conscious point of the disciple's nature at the extreme point of withdrawal, for which all concentration exercises and meditation processes have been a scientific preparation. Then, through the produced tension, the invocative cry can go forth with power and effectiveness. The same is true of the disciples' group or of any group of true and selfless aspirants. There can come a moment in the life of the group when the blended cold light of the contributing personalities and the clear light of their souls can so function that united invocative cry will evoke a response. That cry will ever be concerned with the selfless service of the group, a service which, under the plan, they are seeking to render to humanity. As we continue our study of Rule 3, I am myself struck with the appositeness of its words in connection with this particular historical cycle and in relation to the truths which are slowly taking form in the consciousness of humanity. New truths, and by that I mean truths which are new to the most advanced thinkers and which are only dimly sensed by the most advanced esotericists, are hovering on the horizon of the human mind. The ground is being prepared for the sowing of this new seed and the stage set for the emergence of new actors in the great drama of the unfolding revelation of deity. Certain great concepts are firmly grasped by man. Certain great hopes are taking form and will become the pattern of man's living. Certain great speculations will become experimental theories and later prove demonstrated facts. Beyond all this, two things are happening. Men are being stimulated and brought to that point of necessary tension, which, as a result of a crisis, must precede a great moving forward upon the path of evolution. Secondly, a process of reorientation is going on which will eventually enable the mass of men to present a united front upon views hitherto regarded as the vague visions of intelligent and optimistic dreamers. A great stirring and moving is going on. The world of men is seething in response to the inflow of spiritual energy. This energy has been evoked by the unrealized and inaudible cry of humanity itself. Humanity has become, for the first time in its history, spiritually invocative. Let us now consider briefly the nature of that which is being evoked, and thus gain an insight into the interrelation which exists between the three great planetary centers: the human center, the hierarchical center, and Shambhala. Each of these is evocative to the one functioning at a slower or lesser speed, if I might use such inappropriate terms, and invocative to the one above it, again using a form of words which is misleading in the extreme. There is no higher or lower and no greater or lesser in our universe of reality. There is only the interpenetration of substances, which are all basically expressions of matter, and their vitalization and organization into forms of expression of the unknown real. This essential reality we call spirit or life. As a result of the interplay of these two, humanity eventually appears in time and space. Humanity is the result of all subhuman forms of expression and experience and of the activity of superhuman beings. These superhuman beings are the product of past evolutionary systems and are in themselves the sum total of the great divine sacrifice as it focuses itself in our planetary life. Having passed through all previous phases of existence and perfected the consciousness aspect in themselves through human experiences, they have transcended all that men can know and all states of consciousness with which he is or may be in the future familiar, and are now expressing a phase of divinity of which he can know not. They live. They are energy itself, and in their totality they form the bright center lying far ahead. 3. Let it evoke response from the bright center lying far ahead. To this center we give the name Shambhala, the component letters of which are numerically 181421331. This word equals the number 24, which in turn equals 6. I will call your attention to the fact that the word has in it 9 letters, and as you know, 9 is the number of initiation. The goal of all initiatory processes is to admit mankind into realization of and identification with the will or purpose of deity. The number 6 is the number of form, or of manifestation, which is the agent or medium through which this realization comes and by which the consciousness is unfolded so that it can become the foundation of the higher process which is instituted at the third initiation. That initiation is closely related to the third major center, Shambhala. It is the third from the angle of man's perception and understanding, but the first from the angle of deity itself. Again, 6 being the number of the sixth ray, it is therefore the number of idealism and of that driving force which makes mankind move forward upon the path and in response to the vision and press upward towards the light. It is in reality devotion to an unseen goal, ever on ahead, and an unswerving recognition of the objective. Like all other divine qualities, it has its material counterpart, and that is why 666 is regarded as the number of the beast, or of materialism, the number of the dominance of the three worlds prior to the process of reorientation and the expression of developed idealism and purpose. The third aspect expresses itself through pure materialism, and hence the three sixes. In an ancient book on the numbers, the initiate is defined as the one who has experienced and expressed 666 and found it not, who has dropped the 6 and become the 66, and thus has found himself upon the way. Later again, he drops the 6 and becomes the perfected 6 form, the instrument and expression of spirit. The number 24 is of deep interest, expressing as it does the double 12, the greater and the lesser zodiac. Just as the number 6 expresses space, so the number 24 expresses time and is the key to the great cycle of manifestation. It is the clue to all cyclic appearance or incarnation. Its two figures define the method of evolution. 2 equals the quality of love wisdom, working under the law of attraction and drawing man from one point of attainment to another, whilst 4 indicates the technique of conflict and the achieving of harmony through that conflict. 4 is also the number of the human hierarchy, and 2 is the number of the spiritual hierarchy. Technically speaking, until the third initiation, the initiate is occupied with the relationship of the 2 and the 4. When placed side by side, connote relation, and when placed the one above the other, the initiate passes from the 4 into the 2. Needless to say, there is much more to say anent these figures, but the above will suffice to show the satisfactory nature of esoteric numerology, not numerology as understood today. I would have you note that the sound which composed the word Shambhala are predominantly along the line of will or power or of first-rate energy. Of the 9 letters, 6 are on the first ray line of force. 111331, spirit and matter, will and intelligence. 2 of them are along the second line of force, 4 and 2. The number 8 inaugurates ever a new cycle following after the number 7, which is that of a relative perfection. It is the number of the Christ consciousness, just as 7 is the number of man, 8 is the number of the hierarchy, and 9 is the number of initiation or of Shambhala. Forget not that, from the angle of the hierarchy, the third initiation is regarded as the first major initiation. These preliminary remarks are intended to convey much esoteric information to those who realize that number gives the clue to the form and purpose of the life which the form veils. At the third major initiation, the third planetary initiation, which is in fact the first solar initiation, the liberated disciple, for the first time, alone and unaided, invokes the highest spiritual center on our planet, Shambhala. This he does because, for the first time, consciously and with understanding, he registers the life aspect, which has brought his soul into action through the medium of form and vibrates to the monad. That registration enables him to contact the bright center lying far ahead, to blend his individual will with the divine will, and to cooperate with the purpose aspect of manifestation. He has learnt to function through form. He has become aware as a soul of the divine form and its many aspects and differentiations. He now starts off upon the way of the higher unfoldment, of which the first step is contact with Shambhala, involving the fusion of his self will and his spiritual will with the will of God. At the third initiation, he stands before the one initiator, the Lord of the world, and sees his star shine forth, and hears the sound which, to quote the old commentary, pours forth from that central point of power where substance and the outer life have met together, where spirit utters loud the cry which drew the form to meet the highest need, where energy comes forth and blends with force, and in the blending, music had its start within the sphere of blending and of being thus created. Man only hears the distant sound and knows it not for what it is. The disciple hears the sound and sees its form. The one who stands for the third time upon the mountaintop hears a clear note and knows it as his own, as ours, as yours, and yet the note which none have sounded forth. When the demand and the response are lost in one great sound, move outward from the desert, leave the seas behind, and know that God is fire. This means more than its obvious significance. Superficially, it can mean that when the initiate hears the sound, he leaves behind the desert life of physical incarnation, the emotional life of the astral plane, seething and unstable as the sea, and functions on the plane of mind, of which the symbol is fire. That is the most elementary and obvious meaning, and as this section of A Treatise on the Seven Rays is written for those with initiate understanding, the obvious interpretation will not prove satisfactory. The meaning must be broader and deeper. The words outward from the desert have application for the entire life of the incarnated monad in the three worlds of human endeavor and enterprise. Leaving the sea behind has reference to the withdrawal of the initiate from all sensuous experience because, as I have pointed out, the state of consciousness or awareness is superseded when the higher initiations are taken, and their place is filled by a state of being for which we have no word but the unsatisfactory one of identification. This state of being is something very different to the consciousness as you understand it. The phrase therefore means, if such misleading form of words can be justifiably used, that the initiate leaves consciousness itself behind and the five worlds of life expression are transcended. At the third initiation, the initiate grasps what is meant when the one in whom we live and move and have our being, note that expression, is referred to as fire. I elaborated this theme in A Treatise on Cosmic Fire, a book which evades understanding by all except those with initiate consciousness. Fire is the sum total of that which destroys form, produces complete purity in that which is not itself, generates the warmth which lies behind all growth, and is vitality itself. The initiate realization is all brought about by the sudden appreciation or apprehension of sound, by the awakening of the inner ear to the significance of the voice, just as the disciple in the earlier stage awakened to the significance of vision. That is why, at the third initiation, the initiate sees the star and hears the sound. At the first two initiation, he sees the light and hears the word, but this is something different and is the higher correspondence to the earlier experience. It will be obvious that I can say no more upon this subject. It is essential, however, that some knowledge begin to reach the public and at the highest spiritual center to which, as the gospel story intimates, Christ himself was attentive. Frequently we read in the New Testament that the Father spoke to him and that he heard a voice, and that the seal of affirmation, as it is occultly called, was given to him. Only the Father, the planetary Logos, the Lord of the world, enunciates the final affirmative sound. This has no reference, when it occurs, to the earlier initiations, but only to the final ones. There are 5 obvious crises of initiation which concern the Master Jesus, as step by step he took or reenacted the 5 initiations. But lying behind this obvious and practical teaching lies an undercurrent or thread of higher revelation. This is concerned with the realization of the overshadowing Christ as he registered the voice which is heard at the 3rd, 5th, 6th, and 7th initiations. The gospel story gives us the 5 initiations of the Master Jesus, beginning with the 1st and ending with the 5th, but it also gives the initiations of the Christ, starting from the 2nd and ending with the 7th. The latter is left incomplete, and the voice is not recorded because at the resurrection and ascension we are not told of the hearing of the affirmative sound. That will be heard when the Christ completes his work at the time of the second coming. When the great 7th initiation, which is a dual one, love, wisdom, and full manifestation motivated by power and will be consummated, and the Buddha and the Christ will together pass before the Lord of the world, together see the glory of the Lord, and together pass the higher service of a nature and caliber unknown to us. In this connection, it is wise to remember that 3 great energies are focused in Shambhala, the seat of fire. 1, the energy of purification. This is the power innate in the manifested universe, which gradually and steadily adapts the substance aspect to the spiritual by a process which we call purification, where humanity is concerned. It involves the elimination of all that hinders the nature of divinity from full expression, and this again from inherent or latent capacity. This necessitates the leaving behind, stage after stage, cycle after cycle, life after life, and plane after plane, of every tendency in the form nature which veils or hides the glory of God. It is essentially the energy which substitutes good for evil. Human thinking has debased this concept so that purification is related mainly to physical phenomena and physical plane life, and to a selfish idealism which is largely based on the thought of the sanitary care of substance. An enforced celibacy and a rigid vegetarianism are familiar instances of this, and these physical disciplines have been put in the place of emotional loveliness, mental clarity, intuitional illumination, and thoughts of the aspirant become focused downwards into matter and not outwards and upwards into light. To the energy of destruction. This is a destruction which removes the forms which are imprisoning the inner spiritual life and hiding the inner soul light. This energy is therefore one of the major aspects of the purificatory nature of the divine life, and that is the reason why I have put purification ahead of destruction. It is the destroying aspect of life itself, just as there is a destructive agency in matter itself. Two things must be borne in mind in connection with the destroyer aspect of deity and with those responsible for its appearance. A. The destructive activity is set in motion through the will of those who constitute the council at Shambhala and who are instrumental in bringing the forms in all subhuman kingdoms into line with the evolving purpose. Under cyclic law, this destructive energy comes into play and destroys the forms of life which prevent divine expression. It also brought into activity through the determinations of humanity itself, which, under the law of karma, makes man the master of his own destiny, leading him to initiate those causes which are responsible for the cyclic events and consequences in human affairs. There is naturally a close connection between the first ray of will or power, the energies concentrated at Shambhala, and the law of karma, particularly in its planetary potency and in relation to advanced humanity. It will be apparent, therefore, that the more rapidly the individual aspirant approaches the third initiation, the more rapidly and directly will the individual's karma be worked out. Monadic relation, as it becomes established, lets loose the destructive aspect of the basic energy, and all hindrances are destroyed with expedition. This is true also of humanity as a whole. Two factors have subjectively and spiritually precipitated this world crisis: the growth and development of the human family, and, as you have been told, the inflow of the Shambhala force at this particular time, both as a result of karmic law and the planned decision of the Great Council. 3. The energy of organization. This is the energy which set in motion the activity of the great ray lives and started the motivation and impulse of that which produced manifestation. Thus were the 7 ray qualities brought into expression. The relation of spirit and matter produced this ordered process, which again, cyclically and under law, creates the manifested world as a field for soul development and as an area wherein divine purpose is wrought out through the medium of the plan. Again, I call your attention to the distinction existing between purpose and plan. This is the aspect emanating from Shambhala and inherent also in form, as are the other two, which eventually relates to human will through the right use of the mind to the organized planning of his separate and individual life in the 3 worlds, and which eventually relates to and reorients that will to the will of God. These 3 energies are faintly symbolized for us in the life of Christ when overshadowing the Master Jesus 2,000 years ago. The purificatory aspect of the monadic force is indicated at the baptism episode. Secondly, the destroyer aspect can be seen expressing itself at the time of the crucifixion when it rent the veil of the temple from the top to the bottom. The episode which indicates the energy of organization and the relation of the spiritual will of the Christ to the purpose and the will of the Father appears when he said in the Garden of Gethsemane, "Not my will, but thine be done." This final episode is closely related to the consciously expressed will of the Christ child when he realized in the temple that he must be about his Father's business and that his will was to do the will and fulfill the purpose of the Father, the monad, and the one of whom the monad is the expression. It is these 3 energies which have precipitated the world crisis, and it is helpful for us to recognize the factual nature of the Shambhala forces as they play upon our planetary life and work out human destiny. The great energy of purification is regenerating humanity, And of this, the widespread fires, which have been such an outstanding characteristic of this war, 1914 to 1945, are the outward and visible sign. Much evil is being burnt out through the revelation of the appalling character of that evil, and through this, unity is being produced. Mankind has looked upon evil in every land and known it to be wrought by men. Men have seen, and that sight will never be forgotten, and the horror thus engendered will aid in stiffening the will of humanity to betterment. The energy of destruction has its side of beauty when the spiritual values are grasped. That which has so grossly imprisoned the human spirit is disappearing. The rocky grave of humanity is breaking open and releasing men to a life of resurrection. Forget not that in the interim between the tomb experience and the appearance in living form to his disciples, the Master Jesus went down into hell, figuratively speaking, carrying release for those to be found there. There will be an interim between the darkness of the war with the evil history of the past and the appearance of a living civilization and culture based on the spiritual values and intelligently developing the divine purpose. The stage is now being set for this. The crucifixion and the tomb experience lead eventually to the resurrection and to life. The destruction is appalling, but it is only the destruction of the form side of manifestation in this particular cycle, and a point which I would beg you not to forget. It is the destruction of much planetary evil, focused for aeons in humanity as a whole and brought to the surface and precipitated into violent activity by a group of evil men whose destiny it was. This destiny was the result of their own deliberate choice and of prolonged cycles of purely material selfishness. I would ask all aspirants and disciples to ponder upon the destructive purpose of God, a purpose which is motivated by love, guided by a balanced judgment as to form, and which cherishes and fosters the life and its resultant spiritual values. There is an inherent destructive energy in matter itself, and an energy of very great potency. It is with this energy that the Axis powers are working. The destructive energy emanating from the bright center, Shambhala, is something very different, and I would ask you to remember this. The destroying power of spirit is not the same as that of matter. A human being destroys his own form again and again through the evil which he does, and by the material focus of his desires. The following of a life of vice will breed disease, as is well known. The disciple can also destroy his form nature through selfless service and devotion to a cause. In both cases, the form is destroyed, but the motivating impulse is different, and the energy of destruction comes from different sources. The death of a Master Jesus or of a Father Damien and the death of a Hitler or a murderer are not the result of the same essential energies. When the din of battle and the smoke and fire of bombing and the cruel effects on human bodies have faded into the past, it will be apparent to the understanding aspirant that much evil has been destroyed in all fields of human activity. In the field of theological religion, in the field of politics, and in the field of selfish economic competition. It will be for humanity then to precipitate and stabilize the appearing good, and this they will learn to do through the utilization of the third Shambhala energy, the energy of organization. The new world will be built upon the ruins of the old. The new structure will rise. Men of goodwill everywhere, under the guidance of the new group of world servers, will organize themselves into battalions of life, and their first major task must be the development of right human relations through the education of the masses. This means the paralleling development of an enlightened public opinion, which is, speaking esoterically, right response to the sound which conveys the will of God to the ears of the attentive. Then humanity will indeed move outward from the desert, leave the seas behind, and know that God is fire. All right, and we'll move on to Rule 4 very quickly.